It was 2:13 a.m. when the phone rang. Not the kind of ring you'd expect in the middle of the night. This one was sharp, urgent, the kind that slices through sleep like a scalpel. Elizabeth Monroe reached for her phone with groggy hesitation. Her eyes, still half closed, blinked at the screen. Unknown caller. She almost ignored it. Almost. But some tug deep inside her chest made her answer. The line was filled with static. Then a voice. A voice she hadn't heard in 5 years. Beth, don't go to the cabin. Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. She'd bury that voice. It belonged to her husband, Mark Monroe. And Mark Monroe had been dead since June 18, 2018. The first thing you should know is that Elizabeth Monroe isn't the kind of person who believes in ghosts. She works as a night shift nurse at Lincoln Mercy Hospital in Southern Oregon, about 15 minutes outside the small town of Grayford. She's logical, practical. The kind of woman who double-checks locks twice before bed and always leaves a nightlight on in the hallway, not because she's scared, but because it's what you do when you live alone. Since Mark's death, life had been a long, dull ache. Not unbearable, just persistent, like a bruise that never fully fades. She didn't cry much anymore. That part was over. But she also didn't smile the same way either. Grayford isn't the kind of place where strange things happen. It's a town with one diner, 2 gas stations, and a single grocery store that's been run by the same family for 3 generations. People there wave at you even if they don't know you, and they always know you. Mark had been a contractor, worked on old houses, the kind with crooked porches and ghost stories buried in the floorboards. He was good with his hands, better with people. Everyone liked Mark, which made his death all the more difficult to accept. He died on a rainy Monday in June, on a winding road near Lake Haverly, about 40 miles north of Grayford. He'd been driving back from a weekend at their family cabin, a place they called The Ridge. The truck swerved off the road, crashed into a ravine, and burst into flames. They never recovered his body, at least not in one piece. The fire had taken everything. Or so Elizabeth had thought. So when she heard that voice again at 2:13 in the morning, it didn't feel like a haunting. It felt like a warning. She sat frozen in bed, phone still clutched in her hand. The call had ended just as suddenly as it started. No second message, no way to trace it. The screen now read, no recent calls. But she knew what she'd heard. Beth, don't go to the cabin. The thing is, she hadn't told anyone she was planning to go. Not yet. It was just a thought. A quiet plan she'd scribbled in her calendar for next weekend. She hadn't even mentioned it to her sister, Caroline. The cabin had been left untouched for nearly 5 years. Locked up, left to rot, just another ghost in the woods. And yet, the voice knew. The next morning, Elizabeth drove to the sheriff's office. She didn't expect much. Grayford Sheriff Wade Keller was a good man, honest, maybe too honest, but he had the tired look of someone who'd seen more broken marriages and barn fires than actual crime. When she told him about the call, he just leaned back in his chair and scratched his jaw. You sure it wasn't a dream? No, I was awake. I answered it. Caller ID? Unknown. Then it disappeared. You got a copy of Mark's voice? Like old voicemails or something? She nodded slowly. Play one. For me. Elizabeth opened the voice recorder app and tapped an old message from the month before his death. Hey babe, just got to the ridge. It's pouring like hell out here. Might stay an extra night, roads are slick. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Love you. Sheriff Keller listened quietly, then nodded. Okay, yeah, I believe you. That's the same voice? Exactly the same. He didn't laugh, he didn't scoff, but he didn't exactly believe her either. Well, let's say someone's messing with you. They'd have to know a hell of a lot. Voice cloning? Maybe. But why? Why now? She didn't have an answer. Neither did he. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. She lay awake, heart drumming slow and steady in her chest. Something felt unfinished. Not just the call, but everything around it. The timing, the words. Don't go to the cabin. What was there to be afraid of? She hadn't been back to the ridge since Mark died. No one had. It wasn't just grief, it was fear. The kind you can't name out loud. The kind that lives in your ribs and only stirs when the lights go out. She remembered the last time they'd been there together. How Mark had acted strangely that weekend. Paranoid. Quiet. He'd barely touched his food. Spent hours in the woodshed doing who knows what. She'd asked him what was wrong, but he brushed it off, said he was just tired. That memory had haunted her for years. Now it was back. And louder than ever. 3 days passed. No more calls, no messages, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was urgency. On Friday afternoon, she packed a bag, loaded her car, and made the drive toward the ridge. The road hadn't changed, still narrow and coiled like a snake, still flanked by trees so tall they swallowed the sun. When she reached the cabin, everything looked exactly as she remembered except older. Wetter, more forgotten. She stepped inside. Dust, silence, cold. Everything was where they had left it. 2 mugs in the sink, a jacket on the coat hook, Mark's toolbox by the door. She stood in the center of the room, heart beating like a distant drum. Then she saw it. A single footprint, muddy and fresh, right in the middle of the kitchen floor. But she hadn't stepped there yet, and she was supposed to be alone. Elizabeth stared at the footprint. It wasn't hers. That much she was certain of. The mud was still moist, dark, and heavy, tracked in from outside. But the door had been locked when she arrived. Deadbolt intact. No broken windows, nothing disturbed. And yet, there it was. A single print facing the back of the cabin. Like someone had walked in, stood still for a moment and never left. Her breath slowed, not from panic, from calculation. She stepped back carefully, letting her eyes scan the room, the shadows, the corners. She listened. Cabin wood creaked sometimes on its own, she knew that. The wind slipped through the boards. But this wasn't that. This felt watched. She followed the print to the edge of the hallway. That's when she noticed something else. The smell. It was faint, but sharp like old tobacco, wet ash, and something metallic. Blood? She wasn't sure. But it didn't belong. Not here, not after all these years. She stepped into the hall, past the crooked picture frame. Mark had hung their first summer there. Her hand brushed the wall, cold. Then came the creak. Not behind her, but above. The attic. There was no reason to go up there. No one ever used that space. It was cramped, unfinished, filled with insulation and mice droppings. But the sound came again soft, like a shift in weight. A slow shuffle, like someone trying to move without being heard. She climbed the stairs one at a time, her heart quiet but her limbs tense, like the body knew something the brain refused to say out loud. At the top, she paused. The attic hatch was shut. Elizabeth reached up and pushed it open. Dust fell in slow motion, catching the beam of light from the hallway. She hoisted herself up, knees scraping the old wood, and then silence. There was no one there. Just boxes, old Christmas ornaments, a broken lamp, and then, in the corner, a cell phone. Not hers. Black. Cracked. A model from 5 years ago. She crawled over and picked it up. Still warm. She flipped it open. No passcode. Just a screen, already open to the recent calls list. Only one number. 2:13 a.m. Outgoing. Her name. Elizabeth Monroe. Her hand trembled not from fear but from recognition. She knew this phone. It had belonged to Mark. It was one of the few things that hadn't been recovered from the wreck. At the time, the sheriff assumed it had burned up in the fire, but here it was fully intact. She took it downstairs and plugged it in. After a few minutes, the screen came to life. There were texts, dozens of them, all dated June 17th, 2018, day before the crash, all unsent. Most were fragments. They found out. I don't know who to trust. Beth, if anything happens to me, check the shed. The last one made her stomach drop. The woodshed, where he had spent hours that weekend, where he refused to let her help, where he kept the door locked, even from her. Outside, the wind picked up. Trees rustled like dry paper. The cabin creaked again, but this time it didn't feel random. It felt responsive. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside. The shed was about 20 yards into the trees, half collapsed now, roof sagging, door half off the hinges. Nature had started swallowing it. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first damp wood and rust. Then her light caught the floorboards. Loose, pulled back, just enough to suggest intention. She dropped to her knees and peeled them up. Below, wrapped in a thick tarp, was a box. She pulled it out, heart steady now, like the pieces of her were rearranging into something sharper. She opened the box. Inside, cash, bundles of it, at least 20 grand, a pistol, loaded, and a notebook. She opened it carefully. The pages were water-stained but still legible. Inside were names, dates, times, amounts. She recognized some of the names: local contractors, building inspectors, even a councilman. What was this? Some kind of payoff log? Her eyes locked onto the last entry, scrawled hastily in Mark's handwriting. If I end up dead, it's not an accident. Start with Sheriff Keller. The flashlight slipped in her hand. The sheriff? Elizabeth sat there, in the dark, heart suddenly deafening. She remembered how calmly he'd listened to her, how gently he'd dismissed her concern, how quickly he'd suggested it could have been a prank, a bad dream, a deep fake. He knew, or at least Mark thought he did. By the time she drove back into town, it was past midnight. She parked her car 2 blocks from the sheriff's office and walked. Her mind was racing, but her steps were steady, calculated. She didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, she made her way to the library. It was closed, but the back window latch had been busted for months, something Mark had pointed out once during a community meeting. She slipped inside and went straight for the newspaper archives. Grayford Gazette, June 2018. The article about Mark's crash was on the front page, but something caught her eye. An ad. Small, tucked in the corner. It was for a property auction. Parcel 76, Ridgeview Cabin, and adjacent land, forfeited by Mark Monroe. Transfer of title pending. Buyer, K.R. Holdings. K.R. She knew that name. Keller, Roscoe, a private real estate firm owned by Sheriff Keller's brother-in-law. A week after Mark's crash, the cabin was being quietly transferred. The sale never finalized, but the intent was there. Suddenly, the picture came into focus. Mark had found something illegal, maybe involving land deals, money laundering, bribes, and he was silenced for it. The crash wasn't a crash, and the call she got 5 years later wasn't a mistake. It was a final breadcrumb, left by someone who never got to finish what he started. Elizabeth didn't go home that night. Instead, she parked her car by the lake, the same spot she and Mark used to sit on summer nights, drinking cheap wine and counting satellites. The sky was overcast now, no stars, just a dull reflection on the water, like the world had turned inside out. She held the old phone in her lap. The call log was still there. 1 call, outgoing, 2:13 a.m. to her current number, from a phone that was supposed to be destroyed 5 years ago. She didn't know what scared her more, that the call had happened or that someone had made sure she would find it. She thought about the name in the notebook. Sheriff Keller. It wasn't just suspicion, no, it was a thread, and if she pulled hard enough, the whole thing might unravel. She turned the key in the ignition and drove straight to Grayford's city records office. It was 2:41 a.m. The building was dark, but she still had the spare key from when she volunteered during tax season. No one ever bothered to change the locks. Inside, she moved fast, through the archives, to the dusty filing cabinets no one touched anymore. Property transfers, Ridge County, 2017, 2019. She flipped until she found it. Parcel 76. Ridgeview Cabin. Ownership: Mark Monroe. Transfer attempted, June 18, 2018. Reason for forfeit: pending investigation. Suspicious circumstances. Suspicious. And yet, no charges. No follow-up. She flipped the page. Attached was a memo. Handwritten. Hold title transfer until further notice. Per Sheriff Keller. Her stomach dropped. There it was. Proof that the sheriff had personally stepped in. The moment Mark died, the cabin became a piece of contested property, and someone wanted it badly. She took photos of the document and slipped back into the night. The next morning, Elizabeth made an appointment at the sheriff's office. Not with Keller, but with Deputy Rena Carter. Rena was new, only joined the force a few months before Mark's death. Young, quiet, by the book. Mark had always said she was the only honest one left in that building. When Elizabeth arrived, Rena was waiting. Her posture was stiff, controlled. "Liz," she said softly. "You okay?" "No," Elizabeth replied. "But I think you can help." She handed her the phone. Rena studied the screen. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic of the cabin." Rena looked up, her eyes sharp now. "That's not possible. That phone was... We logged it as destroyed." "You logged it," Elizabeth said. "Or Keller did?" Rena hesitated. Then she said quietly, "I didn't see it myself. Keller took charge of the evidence that day. Said it was already too damaged." Elizabeth opened the notebook to the final page and slid it over. Rena read it slowly. Her face paled. "I need you to do something," Elizabeth said, discreetly. "I want to know where Keller was last night." "At 2:13 a.m. Rena gave a slow nod. "Okay, but if he finds out I'm helping you?" "He won't," Elizabeth said. "He won't find out. Not yet." It took 2 hours before Rena called. "I checked the logs," she whispered. "He wasn't home." Where was he? His cruiser was GPS tagged near the cabin. Between 1:50 and 2:30 a.m. Elizabeth closed her eyes. There it was. Keller had been at the cabin. Maybe to move something, maybe to plant the phonier to take it back, and failed. Either way, it meant he knew. That same afternoon, Elizabeth met with someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Tom Rourke, an investigative reporter who had covered Grayford for 2 decades before moving to Detroit. He had once tried to interview Mark right before the accident. Elizabeth found him at a coffee shop off Route 9. He looked older now, eyes tired, but sharper than ever. "Elizabeth Monroe," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "I need your help," she said, sliding the notebook across the table. Tom flipped through it. His face changed. "This is big," he said. "If this is real, it is. I need to know what Mark was looking into. You said you contacted him once before the crash?" Tom nodded slowly. "Yeah, I got a tip about land grabs around the lake, government repossessions tied to a shell company, K.R. Holdings. Most of the owners didn't even know they'd signed the property away, but Mark, he didn't want to talk, said it wasn't safe. Do you still have the tip?" "I kept everything." He pulled out a folder. Inside were names, photos, contracts, all linked to K.R. and at the topo name, circled in red, Eric Baines. a real estate broker known for laundering money through fake property sales, indicted in 2020 for fraud released last year, and listed as a silent partner in KR. Elizabeth's mind was spinning now. She remembered Baines. He'd been at their wedding. He gave them a set of crystal wine glasses as a gift. She never saw him again after Mark's funeral. Until now. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. She spread out every photo, document, and note across her living room floor. The room looked like a crime scene because, in a way, it was. But one thing still didn't fit. The call. It wasn't just someone planting evidence. Someone had used that phone. And that meant either the phone had never burned or someone had rebuilt it from the original SIM. She powered it off and popped the back open. The SIM card was intact, slightly scorched around the edge, but still readable. She took it to her neighbor's son, Micah, who repaired phones out of his garage. Barely 19, but a genius with hardware. "Can you trace this?" she asked. He plugged it into a diagnostic reader. "It's not been used in years," he said, "but the last tower it pinged from." He clicked a few keys. "Wasn't near your cabin." Elizabeth leaned in. "Where then?" Micah pointed at the screen. "Near the cemetery. Grayford Memorial Park." The timestamp? 2:13 a.m. Same as the call. Elizabeth felt cold again. The kind of cold that settles under the skin. That wasn't a glitch. That wasn't a coincidence. That was Mark's grave. Grayford Memorial Park stretched across 12 acres just south of the highway, nestled between a withering pine forest and a long-forgotten train line. Elizabeth had always avoided the place. Not because she didn't love Mark, but because standing over his grave made it real, final. But now, nothing felt final anymore. The gates were locked at night, but she parked on the shoulder and climbed through the side fencing, like she'd done once as a teenager during a Halloween dare. Mark's grave was in the southeast corner. Simple, polished gray stone, no flowers anymore, just a few dried leaves and an old coin someone must have left. She approached it slowly. The air felt wrong, still and dense, like the moments before a thunderstorm. And then her phone buzzed. No caller ID. She froze. Another call. Just like last time. She picked up. No sound, only static. And then a breath. Slow, hollow, distant. And finally, a whisper. "You're not supposed to know." The line went dead. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She turned on the flashlight, aimed it at the grave. The stone looked undisturbed. But when she stepped closer, she noticed something odd. Fresh dirt. Just a thin line of it, like someone had dug around the edge of the stone recently, then packed it back in. She crouched, brushing her fingers across the soil. It crumbled too easily. New. And then her light caught something else, a small piece of metal wedged between the stone and the earth. She dug it out. It was a flash drive, coated in grime, but intact. She didn't say a word, just stood there in the dark, the whisper still ringing in her ears. Then she walked out the way she came. At home, Elizabeth plugged the flash drive into her old laptop she hadn't used since before the accident. No Wi-Fi, no sync, safer that way. Inside the drive was only one folder, Sentinel. She clicked it open. Videos, documents, audio files, dozens of them, all with timestamps, all dated between January and June, 5 years ago. The last 6 months of Mark's life. She opened the first video. It was grainy, a hidden camera feed, looked like the sheriff's office. Keller was there, talking to someone off frame. "We hold the deeds for 90 days, then transfer to KR. No paper trail." Monroe's getting nervous though. The voice off frame. "Then make sure Monroe doesn't talk." Her stomach dropped. She clicked another file. This one was footage of a meeting at a cabin, Mark's cabin, but he wasn't in it. Instead, 3 men, Keller, Baines, and a third she didn't recognize. They were talking about payouts, signatures, ghost buyers, and then Baines said something she'd never forget. "If he dies on that road, it's clean. You do your job, we do ours. It wasn't just corruption, it was murder. Premeditated. She kept watching, one file after another, until the screen started to blur from her tears. Mark hadn't just stumbled into something dangerous. He documented it, hidden the evidence. And now, someone had led her straight to it. Why? The next day, she went to Rena again. The young deputy was pale as a sheet after watching just one video. We need to arrest him, she said. No, Elizabeth replied. We need to go public. Arrests can be buried, discredited. But if the people see it, first Keller's done. Rena nodded. Give me a day. I'll get a secure line to the state attorney. But she never got the chance. Because that night, someone broke into Elizabeth's home. It happened at 2:08 a.m. She was asleep on the couch, the laptop still on the coffee table. And then a sound barely audible. The back door. She opened her eyes. A shadow moved past the hallway. She didn't scream, didn't move. She waited, and then she reached under the cushion. Mark's old revolver. She never sold it, never even fired it. But tonight, she wrapped her fingers around it and stood up slowly. The figure was in the kitchen. Tall, hooded. He turned when he heard her, stared directly at her. She raised the gun. Stop right there. But he didn't move. He just looked at her, eyes dark, empty. And then he said, "You were supposed to grieve, not dig." He stepped forward. She pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. He collapsed. But when she turned on, the light was gone. No blood, no body, just the back door wide open and the laptop missing. She stood there for a long time, shaking, listening, but there was only silence. In the morning, she filed a report. Rena came in person. There's no trace of a break-in, she said quietly. Nothing on the cameras, no gunshot recorded. It's like it never happened, Elizabeth finished for her, but she knew it had. And she knew who had taken the laptop, not the files. Those had already been backed up, but the laptop itself had a fingerprint reader, and she had unlocked it once that night, meaning someone had her biometric data now. That evening, Tom Rourke called. Something happened, he said. He sounded shaken. I went to follow up with a source about KR, and he's gone. House burned down last night, no survivors. Elizabeth didn't speak. And one more thing, Tom added. That voice on the phone you heard? I've heard it too. Her blood turned cold. What? I got a call this morning. Unknown number. Played the exact same line. You're not supposed to know. He paused. And Elizabeth, it was Mark's voice. She didn't respond. Not for a long time. Because deep down, she'd already known. 3 days passed. No more calls, no new sightings. But Elizabeth could feel it, something was shifting. Quietly, beneath the surface. She could feel it in her bones, in the stillness of her house, in the way her lights flickered when she walked past, in the cold that never seemed to leave, even when the heater was on. Tom Rourke drove in from Knoxville. He had his doubts at first, everyone did, but once he'd heard the voice, once he'd seen the files, he stopped doubting. They sat in her kitchen, with the windows covered and the lights dimmed. On the table between them was a single sheet of paper, printed from one of the hidden folders on Mark's flash drive. At the top, in bold block letters, Project Sentinel. Underneath, behavioral interference, cognitive isolation, subject manipulation, field testing protocol, Grayford. It wasn't just corruption, Elizabeth said. It was something else, something bigger. Tom leaned forward, reading. Controlled paranoia, delusional symptom planting, voice loop hallucinations. He looked up at her. This isn't about real estate or bribery. This is psychological warfare. Elizabeth nodded. Tested. On people like Mark. Tom whispered. On an entire town. It started making sense, piece by piece. The abandoned buildings, bought for pennies. The sudden suicides 5 and 2 years, all ruled as mental health declines. The strange disappearances. The unmarked vans that came at night and left before dawn. And Mark? He had found something. Or maybe they had used him as a subject. Either way, the flash drive didn't just contain evidence. It was a warning. But here's the twist that changed everything. On the final audio file, buried in a subfolder labeled Archive, Mark's voice returned. Clear. Sharp. No static. I don't know how long I have, the recording began. If you're hearing this, I'm probably already gone. Or worse. He took a breath. They said I volunteered. I didn't. They drugged me, hooked me to machines, made me hear things that weren't there, made me see people who'd been dead for years. A pause. And then, they told me to forget. He laughed, but it was hollow. But I didn't forget. I remembered. And I recorded everything. Every session. Every test. Every scream. I buried it where they'd never look. Another breath. Beth, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I thought I could fix it. Thought I could protect you. But you were right. Some things you shouldn't go looking for. The tape ended. Elizabeth stared at the screen because it wasn't the voice alone that shocked her. It was the date, June 17th, 2019, Mark's date of death. Same day, same hour. The recording was timestamped at 11:48 p.m. The crash occurred at 11:45 p.m. She double-checked, refreshed the metadata, no error, no corruption. The message was recorded after he had already been declared dead. Tom leaned back, visibly disturbed. So, either the time of death was wrong, or he didn't die, Elizabeth whispered. Silence filled the kitchen. But in that silence was something else doubt. What if the body in the car hadn't been Mark? What if he had escaped? Or worse, what if they let her believe he was dead? That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She lay awake, the audio playing over and over in her head. The static, the voice, the strange clicking sound in the background. She got up at 2:30 a.m. and opened the file again, slowed it down, listened carefully. There it was, faint, but real. A mechanical hum underneath Mark's voice, a soft repetition, almost like coordinates. She cross-referenced the sound with signal beacons. It wasn't random. It was a locator pulse, the kind used in old emergency transponders. Latitude and longitude embedded in the audio file. She entered the numbers into Google Maps. It led her to a stretch of woods 14 miles northeast of Grayford. No roads, no towns, just trees. And one tiny gray dot labeled Outpost 33, decommissioned. But when she clicked on it, the page reloaded. No results found. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she started packing. Tom wasn't happy about it. This is exactly what they want, he said. They're luring you out. Elizabeth zipped up her coat. Then let them. But I'm not leaving this unfinished. He hesitated, then reached into his bag and handed her a radio. No signal up there. But if anything happens, call on channel 8. I'll be listening. She nodded. She left just before dawn. The roads were slick from the morning frost. Her tires crackled over gravel as she drove north past the old bridge and into the hills. At 7:12 she parked. The trail was overgrown. Trees tangled into each other like twisted ribs. The wind was still, not even birdsong. She walked for 30 minutes before she saw it. Half hidden beneath a curtain of ivy and ash, a concrete structure. Windowless, no markings, just a heavy metal door slightly ajar. She stepped inside. It smelled like rot and copper. Old wires dangled from the ceiling. The floor was cracked, and rusted metal furniture lay toppled over in the corners. But what caught her attention was the hallway, a narrow passage leading down into the earth. And on the wall, faintly scratched into the paint, "Remember who you are." She followed the passage, down and down, until the air turned cold and thin and the walls began to hum. At the end of the hallway was a chamber. Inside a single chair, bolted to the floor. Head restraints, IV lines, electrodes, and in the corner, a video monitor. Still blinking. She stepped closer. The screen lit up, and Mark's face appeared. Not a video. A live feed. He was older now. Beard grown, eyes sunken, but alive. And then the screen flickered, and he looked straight into the camera. Straight at her. "Beth," he whispered, and then the feed went black. Elizabeth stood frozen. The screen had gone black, but the echo of his voice remained. "Beth." It wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't a recording, it was real, he was alive. Somewhere, buried within this decaying concrete labyrinth, Mark was still here. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, breath shallow. The air was getting thinner, or maybe it was just her fear rising. But then she noticed a second door, hidden behind a rusted locker. It was partially open. She hesitated, then pushed it. The hinges groaned, and a wave of cold air hit her like a tide. Inside, stairs, descending into complete blackness. She turned on her flashlight and stepped into the dark. The basement smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic, bitter. The walls were lined with disconnected wires, and the floor was slick with condensation. Her light flickered as she moved forward, the silence pressing against her ears. And then, voices. Not loud, not clear. Just faint whispers, like echoes trapped in the walls. She stopped, focused. Words began to form. Subject response abnormal. Recommend immediate reset. Behavioral loop initiated. She reached the final chamber. It looked like a lab, or what was left of one. Desks overturned, papers scattered, screens cracked and blinking with garbled code. On the far side, behind a glass partition, was a room lit by a single flickering bulb. And inside, a man, sitting in a chair, arms limp at his side, head tilted, asleep, no restraint. Elizabeth rushed forward, slamming her hand against the glass. "Mark." No response. She looked around, found a keypad beside the door. It had power. She tried 1706, their anniversary. Denied. She tried his birth date. Denied. She stared at the keypad, breathing hard. Then she looked again at the scratched wall near the hallway. "Remember who you are." Her thumb hovered, then typed, "BETH." The door clicked. The moment she stepped inside, his eyes opened. Bloodshot, unfocused, but aware. "Beth," he rasped, barely audible. She knelt beside him, reaching for his restraints. "What happened to you? What is this place?" He tried to speak, shook his head. "They didn't let me leave. Said I was contaminated. Said my memories were breaking protocol." Elizabeth looked around. "Who are they?" His voice dropped. "Not just scientists, contractors, government, corporations. Doesn't matter anymore." He coughed. "I remember too much. I left the recordings for you. I thought they wouldn't find them, but they always find everything eventually." She freed his wrists. "We need to go." Mark tried to stand, collapsed. "I can't. I'm not like I was. They tested things on me, Beth. Chemicals, frequencies. I hear things now. Voices that aren't mine." Elizabeth helped him up. He winced in pain, but managed to stay upright. They moved through the corridor, back the way she came, and then the hallway lights snapped on. All of them. A loudspeaker buzzed, and a voice, synthetic, emotionless, filled the air. Unauthorized extraction detected. Security lockdown initiated. Doors slammed shut behind them. Emergency sirens began to wail low, rhythmic, hypnotic. Mark grabbed her hand. "We need to go. Now." They ran. Through flickering hallways, up cracked stairwells, through abandoned labs. Elizabeth's flashlight died halfway, but the emergency lights led the way. When they reached the exit, the metal door slammed shut in front of them. No keypad this time, just a scanner. Mark stepped forward, hand trembling, and pressed it against the panel. A long pause. Access granted. The door hissed open, and they stepped into the morning light. Tom was waiting in the car, parked at the tree line. When he saw them, he froze, especially when he saw Mark. He didn't speak, just drove. They didn't go home. Couldn't. Instead, Tom took them to an old ranger cabin deep in the mountains. No phone service, no internet. There, Mark told him everything. The voice on the call, it was his. Or rather, a version of his voice, captured during one of the experimental sessions. They recorded everything: memories, emotions, reactions. Then they tried to see if they could replicate them artificially. Elizabeth listened, barely breathing. They created audio loops like ghosts. That's what Project Sentinel was, inducing paranoia through synthetic memory triggers. The phone call you got, it wasn't supernatural. It was planned. It was planted. Tom frowned. But how did it happen 5 years after you died? Mark looked down. Because I never died. They staged it, faked the crash, burned the car with someone else in it. I think it was a John Doe from the local morgue. Elizabeth blinked, horrified. But why? Because I was talking to the wrong people, digging too deep. Once I figured out what Sentinel really was, they erased me. He looked at her. And then they used you. The phone call was a test. They wanted to see if the trauma still worked, if the memory trigger was still intact. Elizabeth felt sick. Why me? Because you were the closest link. They never stopped watching you. You were just another part of the experiment. The truth was darker than any ghost story. There were no hauntings, no spirits, just men in suits, cold machines, synthetic voices made to sound like love. And now, they had to decide what to do with the truth. Mark reached into his bag and pulled out another flash drive. This has everything. Videos, transcripts, location logs, proof. Tom looked at him. We take it to the press. The FBI. Hell, we leak it online. But Mark shook his head. You think this hasn't happened before? You think they didn't already plan for that? He looked at Elizabeth. If we expose them, they'll come after everyone. You, Tom, my parents. It won't stop. Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Then she said something none of them expected. Then maybe we don't expose it. Maybe we just disappear. Tom stared at her. You're serious? She nodded. Sometimes surviving is the only rebellion left. Later that night, as the wind howled outside and the fire cracked softly in the stove, Elizabeth checked her phone for the first time in days. No messages, no calls, except one from a blocked number, timestamp, 2:14 a.m. She stared at it, didn't answer, didn't delete it either, just watched as it rang and rang until the screen went dark again. A year passed. In that time, Elizabeth changed her name, moved twice, left her job, cut ties with almost everyone except Tom and, of course, Mark, though even with him, things were never quite the same. They lived quietly now, far from the towns they once knew, a place where the internet was slow and the stars were visible, where people still waved at each other on the street. Mark spent most days on the porch, staring into the woods. He rarely spoke about what happened. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind hit just right, Elizabeth would find him murmuring to himself like he was answering questions no one else could hear. They never used the flash drive. They kept it locked in a fireproof box, buried under floorboards, because deep down, they both knew the truth. The people behind Project Sentinel weren't just shadows in the dark. They were the architects of silence, the masters of vanishing. And if that drive ever saw daylight, it wouldn't be long before they did too. One morning, Elizabeth found a letter slipped under their door. No address, no stamp, just a plain envelope with 4 words typed in the center. You weren't supposed to. No signature, no explanation. She burned it without telling Mark. Some ghosts don't haunt, they warn. Sometimes she still gets calls. Blocked numbers, silent voicemails. One even played a lullaby, the same one her mother used to hum when she was sick, except her mother had passed 10 years ago. And that version, it had static woven into it, like it wasn't recorded, but constructed. She doesn't answer them anymore, doesn't even listen, but she can't bring herself to change her number, because some part of her still wonders if it ever truly ended, or if this is just another phase of the experiment. Tom left 6 months ago. Said he couldn't take the silence. Said the trees felt like watchers. That every time he opened his laptop, something new would appear in his search history articles he never clicked, names he never typed. Before he left, he looked Elizabeth in the eye and asked her, "What if we're still in it?" She wanted to say he was wrong, wanted to tell him that they made it out, that they were safe now, but she couldn't, because part of her agreed. What if escape was just another layer? What if freedom was the final illusion? There's something unsettling about being alive when you were supposed to be dead. Mark knew that better than anyone. Every time he walked past a mirror, he looked twice, not at himself, but at the edges, as if something else might be there, watching. He stopped dreaming. Or maybe he started dreaming all the time and just never woke up again. Elizabeth began writing again. Fiction, mostly, short stories. One was about a woman who received a call from her husband 5 years after he died. The story ends with her answering the call and realizing the voice wasn't trying to talk to her. It was trying to remember her. She didn't submit it anywhere, just saved it to a USB, tucked in the same box as the flash drive. Some stories are better left unread. The last time it happened was on a Thursday. She woke to static in her ear even though her phone was off. The sound was faint, humming, familiar. She sat up, heart tight. Mark was already awake, staring at her from the chair by the window. He didn't say a word, just held up his phone. On the screen, a missed call. Blocked 2:14 a.m. She nodded slowly. Neither of them spoke, because they both knew. It never really stopped. There's no closure in this story. No final arrest, no courtroom drama, no headlines or justice served. Only questions, only shadows, only the quiet hum of something much larger than any of them, moving beneath the surface. The experiment never needed to end, because it worked. It proved what it needed to prove, that memory is fragile, that love can be twisted into a weapon, and that the mind, when properly manipulated, will believe almost anything, even a voice from the grave. So maybe this story isn't about Mark, or Elizabeth, or Project Sentinel. Maybe it's about you, about how easily a single phone call could change your reality. Would you pick up? Would you believe? Or would you hang up and always wonder what might have happened if you had it? Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't that the dead might speak again. It's that someone else is speaking in their place, and they sound just like them. So now we ask you, if your phone rang tonight at 2:14 a.m. and the voice on the other end whispered your name, but that voice belonged to someone who died 5 years ago, would you answer? Or would you let it ring? And if you did answer, would you even know if it was really them? Let us know what you think in the comments. What really happened that night? Was Mark a survivor or just another part of the experiment? Don't forget to subscribe to Twisted Truth for more stories that keep you up at night even after the screen goes dark.